OmniServer wedges, which are included with OmniServer Professional Edition, are built-in components that provide powerful supplemental capabilities that expand the functionality of OmniServer beyond its core connectivity and data parsing abilities for non-standard devices. One of these flexible components is the OmniServer email wedge, which allows you to send your device data as an email message or text in a highly configurable format with configurable conditions. And it provides this ability right in OmniServer, eliminating the need for separate external components. The email wedge gives you the ability to provide timely notifications to key personnel based on specified conditions, allowing those individuals to take action quickly, potentially avoiding costly downtime. In this video, I will step you through how easy it is to configure an email wedge in the OmniServer Professional Edition, and you can see the results yourself. So to get started, first, you'll see I have my OmniServer configuration open here. We need to go to the Clients section, which is available in the tree view here on the left. As you can see, we have a number of different options available in here. You can see email wedges available in my list, along with other supported wedges and standard client interfaces such as OPC and SweetLink client-side interfaces. Now, just a note, if you're not seeing any of the wedges available in your clients section, that would indicate that you either currently have a license installed other than OmniServer Professional. The wedges will be available only if you're using either the free trial version or if you have a Professional Edition license installed. So I'm going to go ahead and double-click on the email wedge to open the dialog window where we see two separate sections of configuration. The first wedges section is where we define new email notifications or modify and delete existing ones. The email configuration section covers the overall email setup, so I'm going to go there first. It covers the overall email setup, and now that includes the from email address of the messages to be sent, as you can see here, and the email server settings. OmniServer defaults to a from address of omniserver@emailwedge.com as a placeholder. You can leave that if you'd like, or you can define another from to give you an idea when you see in your inbox who it's from. So, like this, for instance, you're going to know it's from OmniServer and that it was sent by the email wedge. So, we'll go ahead and leave that at the default for the purposes of our demonstration here. Next, by default, OmniServer will use the default mail server of your PC or your server machine, which should be correct if the machine has a mail client installed and properly configured, which is why use email server to send messages disabled by default. Otherwise, you should go ahead and enable this checkbox setting, which allows you to go ahead and specify an outgoing SMTP mail server, and if the SMTP mail server that you're specifying requires a username and password, you would enable SMTP server requires authentication, and you'd want to provide a valid username and password for that SMTP server. Since I'm operating on a box where I have my Outlook installed and configured properly, it's not necessary for me to specify that information again because it's already defined in my email configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this at the defaults. Starting with OmniServer version 3.2.0.11, we've updated the email configuration section, as you can see here, to include support for TLS and SSL encryption, the ability to change the TCP port used, and we've even added a new test function. So for this video, I'll set things up to use Google's outgoing SMTP mail server just as an example so you can see how those new options work. So the from address is the address you'll specify that you want to show up in the recipient's inbox as who it's from. So we're just going to keep the default here of omniserver@emailwedge.com, just because that's an email address that's going to show that this came from OmniServer. We'll enable the use email server to send message setting, which is going to allow us to enter the desired SMTP server. Otherwise, the default mail server in the Windows OS will be used. So since we want to use Google's mail server, we'll enter smtp.google or gmail.com. And for security, OmniServer now supports, as you can see, Smart TLS with a default port of 25, SSL with a default port of 465, or TLS with a default port of 587.
Either the TLS or SSL option with their default ports will work with Google's mail server. So we're going to go ahead and actually use SSL at port 465. And you'll notice that the most common port for SSL or TLS encryption is what we default to, but you can still change the port to work with the requirements of your mail server simply by changing the port that's specified. So I happen to know that port 465 is the port that Google's mail server uses for SSL, so we're going to leave that to default. And if the mail server requires user and password authentication, which most do, including Google, Yahoo, and other free mail services that support third-party applications, and then you need to enable the setting that you see here, SMTP server requires authentication, and then enter the user and password. So for Google, the username is going to be your valid Gmail address. So I'm going to enter my valid Gmail address. And then for the password, it's going to be a special generated app password from your account. And you basically go into your profile in your Gmail account, and there's a security section that allows you to generate app passwords for specific applications. And at the end of the video, I'll refer you to an FAQ with guides for using Google or Yahoo with OmniServer for email alerts. That steps you through the process you'll have to go through to generate those app passwords from those respective mail services. So I happen to have my app password that I'm going to paste into here. And last but not least, the test button and email to fields now provide the ability to send a test email using the specified email configuration settings to the specified to address. This just makes it easy and more efficient to test those settings and make sure that they're going to work with your email alerts. Now, previously it was necessary to trigger an email event to test the settings, so this is much, much easier than it was previously. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my email address. And we can go ahead and click the test button. And you get that prompt that tells you the email was sent successfully. If any of our settings were incorrect, we would get a message that would tell us why it failed, so that we would know what we needed to change in our settings to get that to work correctly. So that means that an email will be sent to my inbox for testing those settings. If I bring up my Outlook, you can see that test message came through. And it literally just says, this is a test email message sent by OmniServer while testing the settings for your account. Please do not reply. Obviously, you can't reply to that because there's nothing that's going to be able to receive it. But that just allows you to confirm that any of the email events you set up in the email plugin are going to work successfully based off of the email settings that you specified.
And I'm going to move back over to my wedges section. So I'm going to go ahead and click the new button to add a new email wedge. And the name is just a descriptive field to represent this wedge. Since with this wedge I'm going to monitor the fill level on a holding tank, I'm going to go ahead and call my email wedge high tank level. And the optional description can provide additional details about what the email wedge does. So I'm just going to enter sends an email when tank level is high. You'll notice the initial mode of the wedge is going to be enabled or disabled, indicating whether the email wedge will be active once you apply all of your settings or not. I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to enabled, which is the default, since I want to test the email after I'm finished and give you guys a look at what it looks like. So it is possible, you'll see here notification last error. These are two special fields. A notification item allows you to specify an item in your OmniServer protocol used for the purposes of notifying an HMI or SCADA client application that an email wedge action has just taken place. So here I'd need to specify a Boolean item defined in the protocol of the topic I'm going to monitor. And when this email wedge fires an email, this notification item would be set to true. So you'll see there's a button here. You can browse to an item if you want to define a notification item. Same thing with the last error. If we wanted to specify this, if there is ever an error in the function of the email wedge, like something where there's an error message being logged to the OmniServer logger, then that particular error message will be populated to the specified item that you define here. Same thing here. It allows you to browse your topics and available items to do that. In the case of the last error, you want to specify a string item from the protocol that you're using for communication with your device. Just be aware that it isn't required to select a notification or a last error item. You'll only need to do that if you actually plan on monitoring the email wedge activity from a client application. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave notification and last error blank. So moving on to the next section, we come to the heart of the email wedge, which is the trigger section. Here's where we define the conditions on which an email will actually be sent. First, you specify the trigger type. You can see if I select the drop down here, you'll see there are a number of options such as any new value, which is the default, non-zero value or non-empty string, high limit, low limit, matches a given string, contains a given string, deviates from the given value. So a lot of options here. Since I'm going to be monitoring, like I said earlier, a tank level, I'm going to select high limit as my trigger type. Because I want my email to be sent if my tank value goes over a certain amount to warn me that the tank is going to overflow if I don't take an action. Now, working together with the type field, I need to go ahead and specify the trigger item that I want this wedge to monitor. So I'm going to click the Browse button here, and my topic is Sensor 1. That's the one I'm interested in, and my tank level item. So as you'll see, it's just topic.item name is the syntax for the trigger item there. Next, since I selected high limit as my type, you'll notice I have a high field, which is where I define the actual limit that the wedge should compare to the actual value in the trigger item that I just defined. So my tank volume goes to 100,000 liters. So I'm going to define a high limit of 90,000 here. So give me some space between actual overflow so that I can take some action before we actually have a spill on that. So you would want to adjust your values accordingly depending on the type of behavior you're looking for. So after I specify my high limit, you'll notice there's a section called Deadband here. Deadband behaves differently depending on the trigger type that you specified. For a high limit trigger type, an email is only going to trigger if the value goes above the high threshold specified. So if the value of my tag stays below 90,000, no emails are going to be sent. Only once the value gets to 90,000 and goes above that is this email notification going to get sent. Now, beyond that, another email won't be sent until the value actually goes back below the high threshold. So let's say it goes to 90,001, and then it continues to increase. Well, I'm not going to get an additional email for every value change while it's over 90,000. The value actually has to drop back below 90,000 and then go above 90,000 again before another email would actually get sent. So now normally a wedge is cleared and is made available for triggering once the current trigger is processed. The purpose of the deadband is to modify that behavior by specifying a target value which the value of any subsequent triggers must fall below in order to clear the wedge for another trigger. So any values falling above this value will not cause the wedge to be triggered. The easiest way to explain deadband is just an example. So for example, with my use case, since my trigger is set to 90,000, if I were to set a deadband of 5 here, which actually means 5%, then for my wedge to be triggered again, the value of my trigger item must fall below 85,500 first before it actually goes above 90,000 again. So 85,500 being 5% lower than 90,000. So my value, my trigger item would have to fall to 85,500 or lower first before it rises back up above 90,000 in order for my trigger to occur again. So hopefully that makes sense. Now you'll notice there's an ABS flag over here. So if I enable that, that tells OmniServer that the deadband value in the text box here is to be interpreted as an absolute value and not a percentage. So using our same example as you see here, value of 5, this is treated as absolute value of 5 as opposed to 5%. So what that means is the next value of the trigger must be less than 89,995 first before it could be triggered again by going over 90,000. So I'm actually going to leave my deadband blank here for the purposes of this video, as I actually want to know if the tank level starts going up again over the limit, regardless of how below it went first. So if it went to 89,999 and then it went back up above, I want to know about that. So I'll go ahead and leave no deadband on this. Next section we have is the reset section of the Wedge configuration. You'll see here you can specify a reset item and then a reset value for that item. This is where you can actually tell the email wedge what item, a specific item that you'd like to reset, meaning write to, and at what value to actually write to that reset item just before the action of the wedge is executed. So one of the most common uses for the reset value is to reset the value of a trigger once the wedge has completed its action, thereby forcing the wedge to record all instances of the trigger, including recurrences of the same value. So if you had the same value that occurred twice in a row for your trigger item, but you wanted the trigger behavior to actually act off of that, you could use the reset item to do that and make it so that the same value shows up as a new value instead. So that use case is primarily if you set a trigger type of any new value, which obviously doesn't apply to us here. A use case specific to our situation, where we're monitoring a high limit, would be if I happen to have an item in my protocol that allowed me to control whether a pump is on or off, which allowed me to control the state of a pump on that tank. That's controlling the fill of the tank. So if it's on, it's filling the tank. If it's off, it's not. Or vice versa. If you had a bilge tank of some sort on there, where it's on, it's pumping out of the tank. It's off, it's not pumping out of the tank. One of those two scenarios there. I could use this reset section to specify that item for the pump state, and specify a reset value of on or off, depending on what that pump is doing, and automate that process so that if my limit goes high, I can turn the pump off and potentially prevent an overflow that way. So that's one use case for that. And for the purposes of this video, I'm actually going to just leave the reset section blank here and move on to the last section of our configuration, which is the event section. And that pertains to the actual email to be sent itself. So see here in the to field, I need to define the recipient or recipients of my notification email. You can define more than one by using a comma separator between the email addresses. To send the notification as a text message, it's necessary to determine the email domain of your cell phone provider and what they require. For instance, Verizon uses the email domain @vtext. So you'd enter the cell phone number followed by @vtext.com. So if I wanted to send a text to myself, it looks something like that. For the purpose of the video, I'm going to send the email to my work address. So I'll enter krutherford@softwaretoolbox.com. So I have my recipient defined. Next I have to enter a subject line for my email notification. So since we're monitoring a high tank level, I want to use a subject of warning high tank level, which should hopefully get my attention and let me know that my tank level has reached the maximum, has reached the high level limit for me. Then we have the actual message itself, which is going to be the body of the email or text. Similar to an OmniServer protocol, just typing in the message field is treated as standard ASCII text. What you see is what you get. So I've got a text file that has some text I want to use for my body for the purposes of time here. So I'm just going to paste that in there. You'll see a Attention! Exclamation points. This is a notification that the level of tank 1 has exceeded the high limit. Current tank level is, and you'll see for this third sentence here, you'll notice inside curly brackets I've defined my topic dot item dot value, and then so that's going to give me the value of my item. So another valid syntax to get the value. You can leave the dot value off and just put topic dot item, and that'll give you the value. But for clarity, I like to use the dot value just so that if I'm looking at this, I know exactly what it's going to give me. So that's going to give me the current value of my tank level item, and then I've got the word at, and then again in curly brackets I've got topic.item.timestamp. So I'm going to include the date timestamp of when that value occurred as well in my email, so that I know what the value is and when it occurred. So that if I don't look at that email for 15 minutes, I'll know that I got this notification 15 minutes ago. So, which could be pretty critical depending on how fast that tank level is rising. And then just a sentence at the end: please take the required action to prevent tank 1 from overflowing. So the message body also supports expressions inside the curly brackets. For instance, my tank level raw value is measured in liters. But if I wanted to report it in gallons, I could do that with an expression. So find out what the calculation is. I took a look. The calculation to convert liters to gallons. There are 0.264 gallons in a liter. So I could divide my value by 0.264, and that's going to give me my resulting value in gallons. So I would just do that like this, /.264, and that's a valid expression. So OmniServer evaluates the expression and includes the result in the email body. So it's going to give me my value in gallons. And there are a number of valid operators that can be used for expressions in OmniServer wedges. That is a topic that's beyond the scope of this video. So if I click the help button here, though, just want to give you a resource. If I click the help button, go to my email wedge section here, and click the link to expressions. You see there's a whole section on complex expressions. Here's that format for the item, the value, and the timestamp that I just showed you in the body. But if I click on complex expressions, it takes me over to that section of the help file, and it shows me what's valid and what isn't. There's even a whole section on operators and what operators are valid, which operators aren't. So arithmetic, comparison, and logical operators can be used in those expressions. We're just doing a simple division expression for the purposes of this video. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now that I've defined all the sections of my email wedge, I just need to go ahead and click OK to apply that. So for the purposes of this video, I've ensured that my tank level will be above the high limit so I can show you the resulting email. So to see what's going on, I'm going to go over to my Outlook. So here in Outlook is my notification email. I'll go ahead and open that up. You can see OmniServer at emailwedge.com is the from, as we specified. Sent to my work email address, krutherford@softwaretoolbox.com. There's the subject line that I defined, warning, high tank level, and then there's the text. As you can see, everything outside of curly brackets is just the plain ASCII text as you saw it. Then I have the resulting value of my expression in gallons. So that was my the value, what it was over 90,000 liters divided by my formula of 0.264, which is the number of gallons in a liter. So you'll see I got my value in gallons, and then there's the timestamp when that value change occurred, and then my warning. So as you can see, the email wedge in OmniServer is straightforward to configure and gives you the ability to ensure your personnel knows when an abnormal condition is occurring so they can address it as quickly as possible.